Hey there, and welcome to Tales by June, where hearts break, heal, and sometimes seek revenge. Let's begin today's story.
A house, not a home. I watched the rain slide down the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse like teardrops tracing my own thoughts. The thunder grumbled low, like it too had something bitter to say. I was curled up on the edge of the massive white leather couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like someone else's perfume. His perfume, maybe. Or hers. This wasn't home. It never was. We had been married for 3 months now. 3 cold, humiliating, breath-stealing months. And I couldn't remember a single moment he looked at me the way a husband should look at his wife. His name was Adrian King, the only son of Jonathan King, a billionaire real estate mogul. Adrian was cold steel wrapped in charm, devastatingly handsome, and ruthlessly untouchable. And I was just his secretary. Well, his father's secretary. The girl from nowhere, from a struggling neighborhood in Queens, with a sick mother and mounting hospital bills. 3 months ago, Mr. Jonathan King had called me into his study with eyes that held both sadness and calculation. He told me about Adrian's girlfriend, how she was after their fortune, how Adrian refused to listen, and how he, the powerful patriarch, needed someone he could trust to protect his legacy. He asked me to marry his son, not love him, not change him, just stay married to him for a year. In return, he promised he'd pay for my mother's treatment. He didn't know it then, but I would have done it for nothing. For her, I would have given up everything. So I signed the papers, put on the white dress, smiled for the cameras, and walked into hell. Adrian hated me from the moment I said, "I do." He thought I was a gold digger, a schemer planted by his father. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened whenever I entered the room, in the bitter way he spat out my name, like it offended him. He never raised his hand, but words can be weapons too. His friends mocked me openly, calling me Cinderella in disguise, while sipping champagne on balconies I never felt welcome on. His girlfriend, yes, still his girlfriend, laughed behind my back, even as she kissed him in the shadows when she thought I wasn't watching. He told me the first night we came home from the courthouse, "You're just a placeholder. 1 year. That's all. Don't get ideas." I didn't. I just prayed for my mother's health, kept my head down, and buried every piece of my pride. But tonight, as the storm raged outside and the cold luxury of this penthouse pressed against my bones, I wondered how much longer I could do this. How long could I be invisible in a marriage that was supposed to save him, but was slowly breaking me? If you asked anyone now, they'd probably say I married into luxury, into privilege, into a life other women could only dream of. But dreams, I've learned, don't always come with warmth, and privilege can feel like a prison when love is absent. Before all of this, before penthouses and designer gowns and cold, expensive silences, I was just a girl from Queens. My name is Emma Carter. I grew up in a tiny third-floor apartment above a laundromat that rattled every time the dryers kicked on. It was just me and my mother, Lillian. My father had left when I was 8, but my mother never let me feel his absence. She worked double shifts at a diner and still made it home in time to help me with homework. We had little, but she gave me everything. I used to sit on the fire escape with a notebook, watching the city lights flicker like stars. I wanted to write, to travel, to build something beautiful for her. But reality had other plans. When she got sick, really sick, everything stopped. The kind of illness that makes your hands tremble when you read the diagnosis. Hospital bills piled up like bricks, and I took the first job I could find. Secretary to Jonathan King. The King Enterprises building was another world. Gleaming marble floors, tailored suits, elevator silence. I wore the same 2 skirts and carried lunch from home in a paper bag, hoping no one would notice. But Jonathan King did. He noticed everything. He called me into his office one Friday afternoon, the skyline behind him glowing gold with the setting sun. I thought I was being fired. I stood stiff, my fingers shaking slightly as I clutched my notepad. But instead, he said, "Emma, I need your help. I want you to marry my son." I laughed. Thought it was some cruel test. "Excuse me?" "My son is stubborn. He's involved with a woman who's using him for his money. I've tried to reason with him, but he won't listen. I need someone loyal, someone grounded." He looked at me like I was a solution, not a person. "And you think that's me?" He nodded slowly. You're smart, humble, strong. You have no interest in the spotlight. That's exactly what he needs. I'll make sure your mother receives the best treatment, private care, full coverage. You have my word. It felt like the room went silent. My heart beat so loud it hurt. Do you love your son? I asked softly. He paused. Yes, but he's blinded by charm and betrayal. I want to save him from a mistake that could cost him everything. I stared at the ring box he placed on the table. It was simple, classic, cold. I went home that night and watched my mother sleep. Her breathing was shallow. The machines beeped in rhythm with my tears. The next morning, I wore a white blouse and walked back into that office. I'll do it, I said, for my mother. He smiled for the first time, but I didn't. Because I knew the moment I said yes, I wasn't just sacrificing my name. I was giving up any hope of being chosen for love. The wedding was beautiful. Cold, but beautiful. It was held at a private estate in upstate New York, where the grass was clipped to perfection and the air smelled like rain and roses. A string quartet played softly as I stepped out of the black town car in my off-shoulder white gown. It wasn't the dress I dreamed of as a child. There was no lace, no heart flutter, just silk and silence. Everything was arranged by the King family's staff. I didn't get to choose the flowers, or the cake, or the vows. Adrian didn't even look at me when I walked down the aisle. He stood at the altar like he was being dragged into a prison cell, stoic, sharp in his black tuxedo, with ice in his eyes. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. Our hands touched briefly when we exchanged rings. His fingers were cold, mine were trembling. You don't have to pretend, he whispered as he slid the diamond band onto my finger. I know why you're here. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said nothing. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Champagne, flashing cameras, guests I didn't know. His friends raised their glasses and called me Mrs. King like it was a cruel joke. Adrian never introduced me. He never stayed by my side. He spent most of the evening talking to his ex, his girlfriend, Vanessa, who wore a dress far too tight and a smile far too smug. At one point, I caught them laughing in a corner. She looked me dead in the eyes as she leaned in and kissed his cheek. My chest burned, but I didn't cry. I just clenched my fists under the table and waited for it to be over. When we finally arrived at the penthouse, it was nearly midnight. I stepped inside and looked around at the gleaming marble floors and towering windows. A breathtaking view of Manhattan blinked back at me. But all I felt was loneliness. Adrian tossed his jacket on the couch and loosened his tie. He didn't even glance my way. Your room is down the hall, second door on the left, he said. Don't worry, I won't bother you, and I expect the same. I stood frozen in the doorway. You really hate me that much? I whispered. He turned slowly, his eyes hard. I don't hate you, Emma. I just don't trust women who sell themselves to the highest bidder. The words hit harder than I expected. I didn't sell myself, I said quietly, but he was already walking away. That night, I lay awake in a strange bed with silk sheets that felt like chains. The city glowed beyond the glass, but all I could do was stare at the ceiling and wonder. What had I done? And why did it already feel like my heart had cracked wide open? The next morning, I woke up early, out of habit. The silence in the penthouse was thick, like it was holding its breath. I tiptoed into the kitchen, still wearing the satin robe the staff had folded neatly in the closet. I felt like a stranger in someone else's life. The kitchen was all marble and chrome, untouched, like no one had ever used it. I found some eggs in the fridge, a pan in the drawer, and decided to cook. Not because I thought Adrian would want breakfast, but because cooking reminded me of home. Back in Queens, my mother and I used to make scrambled eggs on Sundays. She always added too much pepper, and I always complained, but now I missed it. I missed everything. I had just set the plates down on the counter when I heard the front door open and close. Laughter followed. Adrian walked in, still in last night's shirt, followed by Vanessa, dressed like she'd never left. Her lipstick was fresh, her smile sharper than ever. Oh, she said, stopping short. You're still here. Adrian's eyes landed on the breakfast table, then on me. Didn't think this was part of the job description, he muttered. Vanessa strolled past me, trailing expensive perfume. Is this your way of playing house, sweetheart? She sneered. You thought a few eggs and toast would turn you into Mrs. King? I swallowed hard and looked at Adrian. He didn't defend me. didn't say a word. "She's just trying to be polite," he said with a shrug. "Don't read into it." My throat tightened, but I forced a smile. "I made enough for both of you. Feel free." Vanessa smirked. "Thanks, but I don't eat peasant food." The word peasant hit like a slap. I turned away, walked back to my room with quiet dignity, and shut the door behind me. But once I was alone, I let the tears fall. I wasn't crying because of what she said, or because of the humiliation. I cried because he let her, because in that moment I realized the truth. I had married a man who would rather watch me burn than speak one word in my defense. The invitation arrived embossed in gold. King Family Foundation Annual Charity Gala. Formal attire required, smiles mandatory. I didn't want to go, but appearances mattered in the world Adrian lived in. And I was the wife. The legal one, at least. A stylist showed up that afternoon with a rack of gowns and too many opinions. She pulled my hair back into a tight chignon and painted on a red lip I didn't recognize in the mirror. When she zipped up the deep emerald dress, expensive, glamorous, I almost didn't recognize myself. But inside, I still felt like the girl from Queens wearing someone else's mask. Adrian didn't say much when he saw me. His jaw tightened slightly, but that was it. No compliment. No warmth. Just a cold once over and a nod toward the door. "You ready?" he asked, as if we were heading to war. Maybe we were. The gala was held in a crystal ballroom downtown, draped in white lights and opulence. I stepped onto the red carpet beside him, camera flashes blinding me. My hand rested gently on his arm, and I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Inside, the music played softly. Laughter floated on champagne bubbles. I tried to blend in, stay close to the corners, but whispers followed me like perfume. "That's the secretary, right? Married him for the money." "Did you see Vanessa's face when she showed up?" Vanessa was already there, of course, dripping in silver, glued to the arm of one of Adrian's friends. Her eyes locked with mine, and that wicked smirk curled again. During the dinner toast, someone clinked a glass and said, "Let's hear from the new Mrs. King." My heart dropped. Adrian turned to me, annoyed. "Just say something short," he whispered. "Don't embarrass us." I stood, palms damp, voice shaking. "Thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be here tonight, and I hope the foundation continues to do great work." A soft laugh cut through my words. "Vanessa." She leaned toward her table and said loudly, "Wow, even her speeches are boring." The laughter that followed wasn't polite. It was cruel. Adrian didn't defend me, didn't scold her. He just sipped his wine like it wasn't happening. I finished my awkward speech and sat back down, hands trembling in my lap. The sting of shame wrapped around me like a boa. And then, quietly, Adrian muttered under his breath, "This is exactly why I didn't want this circus. Just keep quiet and smile, Emma. That's all you're here for." I didn't answer. I just stared at the centerpiece of roses and glass, wondering how something so beautiful could feel so suffocating. It happened on a Thursday. The sky was gray, moody, like it knew something was about to go wrong. Adrian had a meeting across town with a group of aggressive investors. Jonathan had been worried. He always said business was war in disguise, and sent me along with the driver, just in case. I knew better than to offer advice Adrian didn't want. I was just there to be invisible. The meeting was in a warehouse-turned-event space in Brooklyn, all glass and steel. Adrian stepped out of the car, looking like power in motion. Dark suit, sharp eyes, no smile. He walked ahead of me like I didn't exist. But 10 minutes later, everything changed. I heard the sound first, an engine revving too loud, too fast. Then tires screeched. A black SUV came tearing around the corner, jumping the curb near the entrance. Time slowed. Adrian was on his phone, back turned, completely unaware. I didn't think. I ran. "Adrian!" I screamed, grabbing his coat and yanking him back just as the SUV plowed through the spot he had been standing in. Glass shattered. Metal crumpled. People screamed. Adrian hit the ground hard. We did. I landed beside him, heart pounding, arms shaking. My knees scraped the pavement, but I didn't care. He stared at me in shock, breath shallow. You pulled me back." His voice was hoarse. "You almost got hit," I said, blinking rapidly, trying to hold in the tears and adrenaline. I didn't think. I saw," he whispered. "Emma, you." Security rushed over, sirens blared in the distance. The SUV had fled. It was chaos. But in the middle of it, Adrian helped me up gently, like I might break. His hands lingered on my arms longer than necessary. His eyes were different, softer, confused, searching. That night, back at the penthouse, the silence between us was different. He brought me tea, sat across from me. For once, not as a stranger. "Why did you do it?" he asked quietly. "You could have been hurt." "Because I'm not as cold as you think," I said, meeting his eyes. "Because even if you hate me, I don't hate you." He stared at me for a long time, and for the first time since the wedding, I saw something crack behind his perfect mask. Respect. Maybe even guilt. That night, he didn't leave the room in a rush. He lingered in the doorway before saying, "Good night, Emma." My name. Soft. Not bitter. I curled up in bed, heart racing, not from fear this time, but from something far more dangerous. Hope. The change was subtle at first. He stopped ignoring me. Adrian wasn't warm. He wasn't suddenly bringing me flowers or calling me darling, but something in his eyes had shifted. That wall of steel he'd kept around him for so long, it had a crack now. A hairline fracture where the light began to bleed through. One morning, I found coffee waiting for me on the kitchen counter. It was the right way, too. Black, 1 sugar. I looked around, confused, and found him leaning on the doorway, watching me with a strange look. "You always drink it that way," he said casually, like it wasn't a big deal. Like he hadn't just admitted to noticing me. "Thanks," I whispered, wrapping my hands around the warm cup like it was a shield. He nodded and walked off. That night, we sat on opposite ends of the living room. I was curled up with a book, the city twinkling behind me. Adrian had his laptop open, typing furiously like usual, but then he stopped. "What are you reading?" he asked suddenly. I blinked. "It's just a novel, about a woman who inherits a vineyard in Italy." "Is it good?" I smiled, surprised. "Yeah, it's about starting over. Second chances." He didn't respond, but a few minutes later he asked, "Did you always want to work in offices?" "No," I said, closing the book. "I wanted to write. Stories, articles. Maybe even a book one day." He stared at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "You should. You're better than this, than what they say." I wanted to cry, not because of the words, but because they came from him. Adrian King, the man who once called me a gold digger in designer heels, was slowly beginning to see me. And I saw him too. Not just the ruthless CEO or the guarded son, but the man beneath it. The one who rubbed the back of his neck when he was frustrated, who had a silent sadness in his eyes, who carried the weight of too many expectations. One evening, I heard him on the phone with someone, his voice low, frustrated. "No, Vanessa, I said we're done. You showing up at the gala was a mistake. This isn't a game anymore." A pause. "Then, she saved my life. So maybe, for once, stop thinking it's about you." He didn't know I was standing just down the hall, frozen. And for the first time since we married, I let myself imagine it. What if this wasn't just survival anymore? What if we could be something real? It was snowing the night of the King Foundation's Winter Gala. Big, soft flakes fell like confetti as the limousine pulled up to the grand estate. I stepped out carefully, one hand on my dress, the other reaching for Adrian's as he stood beside me in a tailored black tuxedo. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, almost like he surprised himself. My heart gave a traitorous flutter. I told myself not to read into it, but his voice didn't sound like obligation. It sounded real. For the first time since our arranged marriage, I let myself feel the smallest flicker of hope. Maybe things were changing. Maybe he saw me now, not as a burden, not as his father's puppet, but as a person, a woman. I stayed close to him as we entered the ballroom, glimmering with chandeliers and laughter. All of New York's elite were there. Senators, CEOs, celebrities draped in diamonds. The room buzzed with power and champagne. Adrian's hand rested on my lower back. We walked in together, heads turning. People stared. But for once, I didn't care. I stood tall beside my husband, wearing my mother's old pendant at my throat like armor. Then I saw her. Vanessa. She was radiant and ruthless in a red silk gown, surrounded by a circle of Adrian's old college friends, Julian, Cam, Lila. The inner circle. The ones who always made me feel like I was standing behind a velvet rope. Vanessa's eyes met mine. Her smile was slow and sharp. "Adrian," she cooed, "you made it. And you brought her." The group laughed. I froze. Adrian stiffened beside me, but he didn't say anything, just offered a tight nod and a curt, "Let's not start." "Of course not," Vanessa said sweetly. "We're here to celebrate, aren't we?" A few minutes later, someone clinked a glass. Vanessa stepped onto the small stage at the front. Ladies and gentlemen, before dinner, we have a little surprise. A tribute to the King family, its legacy, its future. Let's raise a glass. To truth. The lights dimmed. A massive screen lit up behind her, and that's when the nightmare began. It started with pictures. Grainy, stolen shots. Me, sitting too close to Jonathan King in his office. Me accepting an envelope from him on the street. Me leaving his townhouse after hours. Harmless moments. Innocent. Twisted into something sinister. Whispers rose around the room. Then came video. A heavily edited clip from a hospital hallway, Jonathan comforting me during one of my mother's chemo appointments. The voiceover began. A fabricated narration in a voice like mine, but not mine. I did what I had to. My mother taught me to survive. I didn't steal. I secured our future. More photos followed. Me smiling with Jonathan, laughing at some forgotten joke. One image zoomed in to show his hand over mine. Then the text appeared across the screen. Was she ever after the son, or always after the father? Gasps. Laughter. Murmurs that turned to cruel speculation. I couldn't breathe. And then they did the unthinkable. A black and white photo of my mother appeared on screen, taken while she was walking to her cancer treatment. She looked tired, frail. Someone had drawn a red circle around her shopping bag as if it proved something. Another voiceover. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. The audience gasped. A few people chuckled. Someone said loudly, "Wow, the whole family plays the long game, huh?" I stumbled backward. My ears rang. I turned to Adrian. He was pale. His jaw was clenched, fists tight at his sides. But he did nothing. He didn't stop the screen. He didn't speak. He didn't protect me. Not from them. Not from her. I ran. Through the crowd, through the icy doors, into the snow. I could barely see. My heels sank into the slush as I gasped for air, dragging the hem of my gown behind me like a broken flag. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Somehow, I did. A nurse. "Miss Emma, I'm so sorry. Your mother, she collapsed while watching the live stream. We tried to revive her, but she didn't make it." My knees gave out. I sank onto the curb as snow soaked through satin and skin. I didn't cry. I couldn't. It was too big. Too cruel. They had taken everything. I never returned to the penthouse. I disappeared. Adrian tried to call. Text. Showed up at the hospital. I refused to see him. A week later, I was sitting alone at my mother's funeral when Jonathan King approached me. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I never wanted this. I never thought they'd go so far." I didn't look at him, just stared at my mother's name carved into cold stone. "I asked you to marry Adrian to protect him," Jonathan said, "but it was you who needed protection, and I failed you." He handed me a thick envelope. Inside were annulment papers. Signed. Final. "You're free," he whispered. I stared at the documents. "Did you believe what they said?" I asked. "About me? About my mother?" He knelt beside me. "Not for a second. I know who you are, Emma, and I know what you sacrificed, but you don't owe my son anything now, not after what he let happen." Tears finally fell. Hot, silent, endless. I signed the papers the next day. I left the city without saying goodbye. No note. No message. I booked a one-way ticket overseas, boarded a plane with one suitcase and my mother's necklace tucked beneath my coat. And I didn't look back. Because whatever had sparked between Adrian and me was buried now, beneath shame, betrayal, and a gravestone that read, "Beloved mother, taken too soon." Damien stared at the empty chair in his father's study, the same chair Emma used to fill with quiet strength. Now it was just a hollow reminder of everything he had lost. Jonathan, his father, sat across the polished desk, eyes sharp and disappointment clear. "She married you to save her mother," he said flatly. "Not because she loved you. Not because she wanted to be your wife." The words hit Adrian like a punch to the gut. Jonathan leaned forward, voice hard. "Emma's already signed the annulment papers. She's done with this sham. With you." Adrian's hands clenched into fists. "But do whatever you want with your life, Adrian," Jonathan snapped. "If you love that gold digger Vanessa so much, marry her already. Maybe she'll stick around longer than Emma did." The bitter taunt stung worse than anything else. Adrian's chest tightened. He swallowed the lump rising in his throat. He realized, with painful clarity, that he had taken Emma's sacrifice for granted. She had walked into a loveless marriage to protect her dying mother, and he hadn't even seen it. Jonathan's disappointment was a mirror to his own failure. You've lost her, his father said quietly. But maybe, just maybe, you'll finally understand what that means. Adrian looked away, the weight of regret crushing him. He wasn't sure if he still had a chance to fix this, or if it was already too late. But one thing was certain, he wasn't ready to give up on Emma. It had been 4 years since Emma disappeared. 4 years of silence, 4 years of unanswered letters, dead-end searches, and sleepless nights, and 4 years of change. The man who once drowned in ego and pride no longer existed. I sold the penthouse, left the social scene, cut ties with Vanessa a few weeks after the gala, after I finally saw her for what she was, manipulative, cruel, and toxic to the bone. My days were quieter now. Still wealthy, yes, but detached from the old life I once clung to. I took over parts of the foundation Emma used to support anonymously. Worked with cancer care charities. Rebuilt my relationship with my father, who still looked at me sometimes like he wasn't sure whether to forgive or pity me. But none of it filled the space she left behind. Then, on a cold Sunday morning in Manhattan, everything shifted. I ducked into a small independent bookstore near the park, needing a break from my usual routine. I hadn't slept much the night before. Another dream about her I couldn't shake. Something soft and broken in the way she looked at me in those dreams always lingered longer than I liked to admit. The shop was cozy, lined with wood shelves and a little bell that jingled as I stepped inside. I browsed aimlessly, running my fingers over worn spines, until a new release display caught my eye. The Weight of Winter by J.E. Summers. A debut novel. A quiet bestseller, according to the sign beside it. I picked it up without thinking. The cover was simple. Pale blue with a single snowflake falling over a woman's silhouette. My thumb brushed over the author's name. J.E. Summers. No photo. No biography. Just an intriguing note from the publisher. A voice so intimate it feels like the writer lived every word. I cracked it open and read the first page. I married a man who didn't love me. He thought I wanted his money. I just wanted to save someone I loved. But love has a strange way of twisting fate. I froze. My pulse surged. I flipped ahead, reading paragraph after paragraph. Lines about cold winters in New York, a woman hiding her grief behind polite smiles, a husband with ice in his eyes, and a father-in-law who saw everything. The story was fiction. But it wasn't. It was Emma. Only she could write with this softness, this ache. The rhythm of the words, familiar. The quiet strength behind each sentence, undeniably hers. And the details were too close to truth to be coincidence. I bought every copy in the store. Back at home, I read the novel from cover to cover in one night. By the end, I was shaking. My chest felt hollow, my heart raw. She'd changed the names, hidden the locations, but not her heart. That was still there, woven into every page. She had survived, she had told her story, and she was out there, writing, living, healing, without me. But now I had something I hadn't had in years. A trail. And I wasn't going to lose her again. 4 years. That's how long it had been since I walked away from the ruins of my past life. Since I boarded that flight with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My mother died with my name trembling on her lips, her heart shattered by the cruelty of the world I had willingly walked into. I carried that guilt in my chest every single day. I had promised her I would survive. I hadn't promised to stay. I left the country and buried Emma King. In a quiet town in Ireland, under grey skies and old stone walls, I became someone else. J.E. Summers. A woman with no past, only stories. Stories that burned quietly through the pages I poured my pain into. Characters who carried my grief, my rage, and my quiet hope. The words became my therapy, my truth, my voice when I no longer wanted to speak. The novel had taken 2 years to write. The Weight of Winter was a letter to my old self. A whisper to the girl who stood in diamonds at a gala, surrounded by wolves, as the man she had married watched her bleed in silence. It became more successful than I expected. Not that it mattered. I didn't do interviews. I didn't post photos. I remained anonymous. Deliberately. The only people who knew me were the small bookstore owner down the road, my publisher, and the kind old woman who let me rent her stone cottage overlooking the sea. Peace. It was nothing like the Manhattan skyline. But here, the waves never lied. The gulls didn't gossip, and the wind didn't care who I had been before. Still, some nights when the wind howled too loud, I would wake up breathless, remembering his eyes. Adrian, for a long time I hated him. Then I simply let go. The anger, the pain, I buried it, like I buried the girl who loved him. He had never come for me. That was the truth that kept me grounded. Not when my mother died. Not when the tabloids smeared me. Not when my world burned and I had nothing left. He had let me go. So I learned how to breathe again without him. But tonight, something felt different. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the breeze. Maybe the way the sea carried a kind of tension I couldn't name. Or maybe, just maybe, it was that deep, uneasy whisper in my chest that something was coming. I placed my mug down on the windowsill and looked into the distance. I had built a life from ashes, and I wasn't ready to let it crumble again. Not even for him. I adjusted the collar of my soft green sweater and took a calming breath, trying to ignore the flutter in my chest. The book reading was small. Intimate, just the way I liked it. A cozy little crowd filled the creaky bookstore in the village square, surrounded by shelves that smelled like old paper and pinewood polish. I stood in front of them, gripping my copy of The Weight of Winter. This was supposed to be a calm evening. Easy. Just words and quiet smiles. I began reading. He never looked at her. Not really. Until she was already gone. There was a soft hush in the room. Some heads nodded, others tilted with emotion. And then, a voice from the back of the room. Low. Calm. Infuriatingly familiar. Do you think the husband in the book deserved a second chance? My spine stiffened. No. 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 It couldn't be. I looked up, and there he was. Adrian King. In a cable-knit sweater, beard scruffier, eyes darker, and a smirk on his face like he was in the middle of a Netflix rom-com and not casually hijacking my life. The room turned toward him. I blinked. He raised a single eyebrow, clearly enjoying himself. It's a serious question. He was a jerk, sure, but he was also broken. Don't broken people deserve grace? My mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. I cleared my throat. I think the book answers that on its own. His smirk widened. But I want the author's opinion. You seem like you know her pretty well. Laughter rippled through the crowd. I wanted to sink through the floor. Instead, I smiled tightly. Next question? Later that night, I stormed into my cottage, slammed the door, and screamed into a cushion. What was he doing here? Why now? After all these years? After all that silence? The nerve. The audacity. The sweater. I spent the entire night wide awake, pacing and muttering to myself like a caffeinated ghost. What did he want? Closure? Apology? Revenge? I wasn't ready. I wasn't interested. I was peaceful here. At 6 a.m., I finally collapsed onto the couch and dozed off. At 6:43 a.m., someone knocked on my door. I groggily pulled on my robe, yanked the door open, and there he stood, on my porch, with a tea towel over his shoulder and the smuggest grin imaginable. Hey, neighbor. My jaw dropped. I just moved in next door, he said brightly. Can I borrow some sugar? I slammed the door in his face. From behind it, I heard him chuckle. That's a yes, right? Over the next 3 days, he knocked 4 more times, once to borrow a corkscrew, once to ask if sheep on the road were normal, once to return the sugar with a note that read, Thanks, sweetness, and once with freshly baked muffins. I may or may not have bribed the bakery lady to help. I'm very charming now. I hated how much I almost smiled, but I didn't let him in. Not yet, because I remembered the pain, the betrayal, the way I stood at that gala in a glittering dress, humiliated, discarded. But every time I closed the door, part of me remembered how he used to look at me when he thought I wasn't watching. The softness that came too late. And now, he was here, right next door, like a badly written sequel no one asked for. Still, he looked different. Less sharp edges, more boy-next-door energy, like someone who had been thoroughly broken and rebuilt. And somehow, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to punch him or make muffins with him. And that terrified me. By the end of the week, I had begun to suspect Adrian was plotting some kind of psychological warfare. It started with the muffins. Then came the sugar. Then the daily, suspiciously timed, accidental encounters at the local market, where he'd pretend not to see me and then very loudly ask the shopkeeper how to properly pronounce quinoa. But today he outdid himself. I opened my cottage door to find 2 live chickens pecking around my flower beds, and Adrian crouched next to them, looking extremely proud. What are you doing? I asked slowly. He looked up sheepish. Surprise. I got you chickens. Why? Because you love eggs? I never said that. He scratched the back of his neck. You strike me as the free-range, poetic morning eggs kind of person. I stared at him. He stared back. One of the chickens clucked ominously. You're insane, I muttered, closing the door halfway. But charming, he called after me, in a rustic, redeemable sort of way. That night, I found a note taped to the chicken's crate, written in his annoyingly neat handwriting. No pressure, but if you name them, you're officially forgiving me a little. Also, don't name them Scrambled and Omelette. That's cruel. I rolled my eyes and tried not to smile. I didn't forgive him. Not really, but I also didn't kick the chickens out, which probably said too much. The next week was worse. He brought firewood when it rained. He fixed the hinge on my front gate without telling me. He asked the elderly postman if I liked tulips, and then planted a row of them outside my window. Adrian King, former ice-hearted billionaire, was now playing handyman, florist, and chicken whisperer in the Irish countryside. And it was working. Not all the way. Not yet. But enough to confuse me, because underneath all the ridiculousness, there was something real. One morning, I found him sitting on my stone wall, hair a mess, reading a copy of The Weight of Winter. Not for show. Just quietly reading it again, under the gray sky. Why are you doing this? I finally asked. He looked up at me, eyes soft and tired. Because I should have fought for you then, and I won't make the same mistake now. I didn't answer. I just walked back inside and closed the door. But I didn't lock it this time. And later that night, when the wind howled, and the chickens clucked nervously in their crate, I smiled, because for the first time in years, my heart didn't feel like winter. It felt like spring. It was nearly midnight when I heard the knock. The fire in the hearth had gone from flickering to glowing embers, and I was curled up on the sofa, rereading a page I'd written for the 5th time. I wasn't expecting anyone. Certainly not him. But somehow, I knew it would be Adrian. When I opened the door, there he was. Standing under the porch light like he'd been summoned by the silence itself. No umbrella, a bottle of wine in hand, and a look on his face like he hadn't slept in years. I thought you might be awake, he said softly. I am, I said, though my voice was barely above a whisper. He looked behind me, then back at me, uncertain. Can I come in? I hesitated for a heartbeat, then stepped aside. He didn't touch me, didn't push, just walked in like he remembered how the wood floor creaked beneath his feet, like he still remembered where the kettle was. We sat on opposite ends of the couch. The bottle remained unopened between us. The fire crackled faintly in the quiet. It was a long time before I said anything. Why didn't you stop them? He knew exactly what I meant. That night at the Gala, I continued. Why didn't you defend me, Adrian? Why did you let them say those things about me, about my mother? He didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice cracked. Because I was a damn coward. I froze. I saw the photos, the rumors, Vanessa practically feeding them to the press. And I stood there, because I was angry, because I told myself you deserved it. His fingers clenched into fists. But you didn't. God, Emma, you didn't. I stared at the flames, my throat burning. You thought I married you for money, I whispered. I did, he admitted. At the time, I thought my dad forced you into it just to keep me from Vanessa. And I hated him for it. I hated you for agreeing. I told myself you were just another gold digger. I flinched. His jaw tightened. And I was wrong. So wrong. I didn't find out the truth until after you left, after you signed the annulment papers. And then, I asked Dad why you married me. Why you never took a cent. Why you disappeared. His voice broke again. And he told me. I blinked back tears. That you married me for your mother, he continued, voice thick. That she was sick. That you never wanted anything from me, except decency. I looked at him, and you couldn't even give me that. He dropped his head into his hands. No, I couldn't. I let Vanessa and my so-called friends destroy your name. I didn't defend you when you needed me most. And then I lost you. I swallowed the lump in my throat. She died thinking I was ruined, Adrian, that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. He looked up, eyes red. Your mother didn't raise a fool. She raised someone brave, strong. Someone I didn't deserve then, and maybe don't deserve now. Silence fell again, heavier this time. I loved you, I whispered, even when you were cold, even when you looked through me like I didn't matter. His breath caught. I would have stayed, I said, if you had asked. But you didn't. You looked at me like I disgusted you, like I was nothing. His hands trembled slightly. I haven't stopped thinking about you since, he said. Not once, not a day. I read your books. I searched the world for you, and when I finally found you... You brought chickens, I said dryly. He laughed softly. I panicked. But yeah, I brought chickens. I almost smiled. Almost. Adrian leaned closer. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it tonight. I just need you to know that I love you. I didn't know how to back then, but I do now. Tears welled in my eyes. His voice was steady but broken. Real. I'm not asking you to love me again, he whispered, but if there's any part of you that still sees the man I could be, then I'll wait. I'll prove it. I didn't answer, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel hollow, and when he stood to leave, I didn't stop him, but I didn't close the door right away either. I watched him walk back into the night and whispered to myself, I remember that man. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted to believe in him again. It started with coffee, not the grand kind of gesture Adrian used to believe love was made of. Just 2 mugs, one with honey, the way I liked, the other black and too strong. I wrote a few more chapters, I said one morning, sliding the manuscript across the table. He smiled as he picked it up. You always leave me with cliffhangers? That's how books work, I teased. He grinned. It's also how love works, apparently. I rolled my eyes, but I didn't hide my smile. We never made a big declaration about forgiving each other. There was no single moment where the pain vanished. Instead, it unraveled slowly, untied through shared mornings, quiet walks, late-night edits, and small, accidental touches. Sometimes I caught him staring, not the way he used to, detached and cold, but soft, careful, like I was something precious. And sometimes I stared too, because behind the man who once broke my heart stood someone new, someone who learned how to plant things instead of burn them down, someone who still read my books like they saved him. It was spring again when he kissed me. No fire, no storm, just the 2 of us in the kitchen, barefoot, laughing over a ruined batch of pancakes. I turned to grab a spoon, and suddenly his hand was at my cheek, his lips brushing mine. It was quiet, gentle, real. When I didn't pull away, he kissed me again, and this time I kissed him back. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. We didn't rush it. There were nights I still dreamed of the Gala, of that brutal silence, of my mother's face the day she realized I had broken for nothing. But Adrian held space for that grief. He didn't try to fix me, just held me when I couldn't breathe. And one afternoon, sitting under a blooming cherry tree, he finally said the words I hadn't known I was waiting for. I want to marry you again. I looked at him, startled. This time, he added, because I'm in love with you. Because you are my home. My future. And because I want to grow old with you writing books and yelling at chickens. I laughed through my tears. And then I said yes. Not because I was saving anyone. Not because I needed to. But because I loved him. And he had earned it. A year later, our second wedding was nothing like the first. No press, no cold ballroom, no whispered judgments, just us in a wildflower field behind the cottage with a handful of friends, 2 confused chickens wandering through the chairs, and his father, Dad, smiling from the front row, misty-eyed and proud. Adrian cried when he saw me. I cried when he vowed to never let silence stand between us again. And when he kissed me, it was soft and full of everything we had survived. Grief, anger, distance, time. He pulled back, forehead resting against mine. I love you, Emma King. My heart fluttered at the name. My name. Given, not taken. I smiled. I love you too, Adrian. The wind danced. The trees swayed. And the ghosts of who we had been quietly stepped aside for the future we had built. Together. The end. Or the beginning.